everyone, and welcome back to our Golden 20's podcast. My name is Sadie, and I'm joined by my co-host Tegan. And today we have a good life chat for you guys. We are going to be talking all about how to handle major life decisions. I feel like anytime we talk about just navigating life in your 20s, you guys love those episodes. And I feel like your 20s is just a decade to be making lots of changes, trying lots of different things. And that often requires you having to make some tough decisions. So today's episode is going to be maybe a pat on the back to reassure you you're doing everything you can, maybe a warm hug if you need some comfort. But in any case, that's what we're going to chat through. Before we jump into it, we're going to kick off the episode as we do every week with a connection card.
Yes, and we are still in the blue or purple, whichever color this is, category. And this week's question is, what are you ready to let go of?
Yeah, these ones are deep.
Mm-hmm.
I know my answer, I think, but it's kind of cliche. But I'm ready to let go of shame. And I've talked a lot about this on the podcast in different contexts, different episodes. But I used to be, and I hate to start this that way, but I used to be very shameless and like very unfiltered, do things because they felt right, very just like, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do. And I feel like the past few years, your later 20s, you guys, are tough. Very, very hard. And I find reassurance because I find people on TikTok, like I'm on like 30s talk, I guess you can call it. And sometimes I even get people like in their 40s and 50s giving people in their 20s advice. And everyone's like, those years between like 27 to 30 are like the toughest years of life. And I feel like I've really been going through that lately where I'm just like, I don't know, really beating myself up, holding shame about things that are either not even in my control, aren't even, I guess in my control, aren't things that I even know to be true. It's just things that I've like internalized and now feel shame around. And I've really been unpacking this with my therapist, as one should. And a few weeks ago, she's like, do you know what it means by when you say you have shame? She's like, essentially you're saying you're bad. Like there's something about you that's bad and you feel shameful about it. And she's like, but you wouldn't consider yourself like a bad person. So I don't know. All of this being said, we're like really trying to debunk this, but I'm really trying to let go of that because it holds a lot of weight over me when it really shouldn't. And I don't know why or when this started happening, but I'm just sick of it and I'm ready to let it go.
I love that. That's a good one for sure. What always happens is I'm always listening to yours and thinking about yours.
Sorry, I need to let you go first. Because I also ramble for like 20 minutes every single time. I need to let you go first from now on.
That's funny. I think for me, one of my themes like for this year was to try to like be a badass bitch. And I think that I'm still holding on to things that are preventing me from doing that. Mainly a lot of people pleasing and things like that. Even like I was just talking to Sadie about work. We did a personality quiz. And a lot of the things that sort of lead me are relationship based and worrying about other people's feelings. And some of the people I work with were like, I don't know if that's true. Like, you're very organized and like these other things come forward. And I was like, but I would do things in a less organized way to cater to people's feelings. Or like I would do things in a way that's less efficient, say, if someone suggested it and I knew that it would hurt their feelings to say that that was the wrong way to do it. Right. And so I'm trying to let go of that where I'm like, I'm smart. I know I'm smart. I know what I'm talking about. So why can't I just like say it? And then, I don't know. So I'm trying to get better at that and just being like, you know what? I am a badass bitch. So
deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. Screw your feelings. Because even like when I brought up the whole being a badass bitch thing, someone at work was asking me about it and they were like, oh, I don't like that. That doesn't really seem like a good theme for a year. And someone I work with was like, yeah, but Tegan's so nice. If she was acting like a bitch, then she would just be like acting like a normal person. And I was like, see, thank you. I need to like counteract it. Where, yeah, I don't know. So I feel like we're talking about similar themes every week when we answer these questions. But
yeah, true. Just how you know it's top of mind for us and we mean it. It impacts all aspects of our lives. Yeah.
Yes.
100%.
I guess I will also say I have decided that I'm no longer sleeping with my phone in my bedroom. So
okay, there you go.
I'm also letting go of that.
Yeah. Love it.
Great.
Well, I love your answer because I feel like it actually does transition into today's episode all about making decisions. And it's the idea of just believing in yourself, you know, and tuning out other people's thoughts, opinions, and judgments, and just making the best decision you can for yourself. If that's something simple or if that's one of these big life decisions that we're going to chat through in today's episode.
Yes, definitely. And your 20s, I feel like, are filled with so many major decisions. Definitely the most sort of decisions you have to make of your life so far, where up until that point, I feel like a lot of major decisions are made by your parents and you're just kind of, you know, passive. You're a passenger on that journey. But now's the point where it's like you can decide, where are you going to go to school? What are you going to study? Where are you going to live? And what's that mean? How are you going to pay for it? Well, what's your job going to look like? Who are you going to date? Are you going to end up marrying that person? Should you have kids? Do you want to have pets? Are you going to live by yourself, live with roommates, get a car, take the bus? Like, so many decisions, some big, some small. Like, obviously, in the grand scheme of the world, doesn't matter if you ride the bus versus ride the subway. No, but maybe it matters if you buy a car that's really expensive. Like, just so many decisions, and it can be really overwhelming. I think especially if you come from a family where you weren't given a lot of space to make decisions. Like, I know lots of people growing up, like, you're not allowed to pick, say, what color your bedroom's painted, or you're not allowed to pick what you majored in school. You're not allowed to pick what school you went to. So I think especially if you're in a situation like that, it can be even harder to try and then make decisions when you've had no practice.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I love that you bring up how you're raised, because I feel like for me, I am very, very lucky where my parents always let me make my own decisions. And if I was ever unsure and we were chatting it out, the first thing they always asked me was, what does your gut say? Like, what do you feel like you should do? And I'll talk more about that later on in the episode, but that really is now how, well, first of all, that shaped my relationship with my parents, where in my early 20s, when I'm making decisions based off kind of little life experience. So like, this is my first career job, or like big girl corporate job is what I'm trying to say. And now I'm looking, you know, to make a move. My parents were the first people I called to like talk about this with. And I feel like in my early 20s, again, little life experience, navigating things for the first time, I relied on my parents, but also mentors. So I had really strong relationships with some of my professors in college, and they acted as my career mentors when I first started my career. So I would lean on them and my parents for like every and any decision. If it was like, should I move into this apartment? Should I, you know, accept this job? Should I do this? Should I do that? Like, every single decision I called my parents. And why I'm bringing this up is because now that I'm in my last year of my 20s, I make decisions very differently. And that's okay as well, where, you know, I've gotten to a point in my career where my parents are like, honestly, we have no idea what the hell to tell you. Like, we don't know, you know, like your world anymore. We don't know how to navigate these huge ass corporate companies, since both my parents are self-employed. So it's like, I still value their opinion. We still talk about things, but it's more in a way of like ranting and them supporting me than them telling me what I should do. And I feel like if that resonates for you or not, the whole gist here is how you make decisions changes throughout your 20s. I think this could also apply to, you talked about like who to date, who to marry, should you have kids? Some of my friends are married. Some of them have kids, where it's like, that also changes how you make decisions. If, in your early 20s, you're making decisions where you're the only person who's impacted by them, you can make those decisions independently. To then have to factor in a partner or kids, like that also totally changes things. And you just need to kind of navigate all of that. And so much can happen in one decade of your 20s.
Yeah, definitely. I also wanted to, like, we're going to talk more, I think, later about like trusting your gut.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the idea of just like your decision is affecting you. So as much as you like talk to other people and get other people's input, it does come down to you. And you're the one who's going to have to like live with it. Mm-hmm. So like your decisions for you. And I was thinking about like talking to my parents about stuff, and I think in one of the advice episodes where we had talked about like the best advice we've ever gotten given, my parents have given me great advice, but my mom also told me not to date Tyrell, who is, spoiler alert, my husband, because she was like, it'll ruin your friendship, don't do it. So obviously I decided to do it anyways. But it's just like sometimes like you just have to follow your gut, or your decisions are yours. So sometimes you just have to do what the people are saying not to do, as long as you're cool with living with the consequences.
Yeah, 100%. I think the last thing I wanted to mention off the top before we break into the specifics is all around, okay, gals, you're making it sound scary and, tough to make these decisions. So why do I have to do it? And I feel like that's something I constantly think to myself when I'm faced with any type of adversity, is like, I can very clearly see the easy route and I can very clearly see the difficult choice. Why would I choose the difficult choice? And I always have to remind myself, and I've talked about this in past episodes too, I'm obsessed with this idea of realizing your greatness, like really reaching your full potential. And this is something that I've been obsessed with probably my whole 20s. Like as soon as I moved out, I had this vision of my dream life, my ideal self, like this is my full potential. And now, that really motivates me. But in order to reach that full potential, I sometimes need to I often need to challenge myself and shake things up, do things that aren't necessarily easy, but they're worth it. And they're, maybe a leap of faith. You don't know how it'll pan out, but you just need to make that leap in order to reach that next version of yourself, unlock something in yourself to eventually reach your full potential.
Yes, definitely. I think probably like anyone listening, if you think about where you are now, there was probably a point in the past where you were scared about it. Like you were scared to start your job or to move or whatever. And, it worked out so far. So, but it is always scary taking that leap. It's definitely easier to just do nothing. Keep on sticking with what you're doing.
Yeah. And I feel like there's, moments in my life where I didn't make a tough decision, and then I always kicked myself more so than when I did make the tough decision and then had to deal with the consequences, because I think that sense of unfulfillment, again, as someone who like is very motivated to like reach my full potential, feeling unfulfilled is worse than having to pivot. And I just refuse to let myself float through life feeling unfulfilled, So I don't know, maybe that resonates with someone too.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we can get down into the specifics of this episode. We're basically just going to talk about, if you're facing a major decision, the steps you can take to reach a decision. Because, as we said, lots of these things come up, and sometimes you have a long time to think about it. Sometimes you have a short time to think about it. So hopefully there are lots of techniques where, like, no matter what kind of decision you're facing, you can get some takeaways that can help you. The first thing that came to mind for me was to just be like, it's okay, relax. This is especially like if you're like me and you're having a meltdown, it's the middle of the night and you're just like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. It's like, take a second, take a breath. It'll all be good. Remember that decisions aren't quote good or quote bad. They'll all just lead you on different life paths.
Totally. And this is something I've dealt with a lot, especially somebody who is a perfectionist and has such a clear vision of who I want to be, where it's like, what's the right decision? And then if it's not the right decision, it's obviously the wrong decision. And like, I'm not going to make the wrong decision. Like, I don't do that. I only make the right decision. And that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. But I think in the past few years, I've really been trying to change my narrative around that. And I think I've adopted a few mantras that have really helped me, but it's been through the life experience of making, good and in quote bad decisions. But I think one of them that I've shared on the podcast before is I didn't know then what I know now. And a way to kind of like reverse that into like present tense, because that's more so like looking back on a decision and being like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have made that decision, or that didn't work out the way I thought it would. I think in present tense, when you're trying to make a decision, a way to reword that mantra is, this is the best decision I can make based off the information I have right now. And this extends to like the life experience I have right now, like in your career, which is first example that comes to mind for me. Like, I don't know where I'm going to end up in 5 years, so I can only make a decision based off, right here, right now, and my next step, never mind 5 years from now. So I think that's one thing. And then the other mantra I've like recently adopted is I have the skills and support to navigate things if they turn out differently than expected. Because I'm somebody who has anxiety. I am a Libra moon, if anybody cares about my astrology like chart. So I'm like the scales, constantly having to like weigh the pros and cons, anticipate every single thing that could happen, have a plan for how to address it for every single thing that happens. And then that all weighs into my decision making. And then next thing you know, I'm just like so exhausted, so drained, and I'm not even anywhere closer to making a decision. So taking that pressure off myself and just like to make the right or wrong decision, it's just reassuring myself, no matter what decision I make, if it turns out not working out how I thought, I can pivot. I can figure it out, because I've always been able to figure it out. This time's no different.
Yeah, definitely. I think related to that too is to do your research. Like, don't just expect that you'll understand all the options and what they mean automatically. It's okay to be like, I don't even know what this option would look like. Take the time, do some research, like talk to people. Like, I'm thinking if you're trying to find a new job, you get a job offer, like look up that company, look them up on Instagram, look them up on Glassdoor, look them up on LinkedIn, reach out to people. Like, it's okay to do some research and try to get more information before making a major decision.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think the next thing that I really do is journal. And a big part of that is also creating a million different types of lists. So I think this is where you can whip out your classic pro-con lists. And again, this applies to literally any decision I've made. I always start with a pro-con list, but then I journal so many other types of lists and thoughts and feelings. And oftentimes I really have to navigate what am I thinking and feeling versus what is like a society pressure versus what are my friends and family thinking and feeling that I'm now internalizing. So I really journal that shit out like as much as I can. But I think when it comes to these really big major life decisions, the first thing I always ask myself after kind of doing a pro-con list is, what am I afraid of? And oftentimes it's failing, but then, you can kind of then take what are your fear of failing and like break it down even more in a journal entry. But also a lot of the time, knowing I'm a perfectionist, knowing I'm a control freak, I journal what is and isn't in my control about this decision. I think kind of going back to doing your research, I also love to do cost breakouts, budget things, like crunch numbers in a journal entry. Like an example of that is when my last roommate moved out and I was like, do I live on my own or do I find another roommate? Like, I'm running the numbers in multiple scenarios. Every time I switch jobs, I'm like, what do I want for a salary? I'm running my monthly expenses. Like, yeah, crunching numbers just as much as I'm journaling about my thoughts and feelings. And then I already mentioned, this is kind of every single life decision comes back to this one journal prompt for me, which is, who is my ideal self? And really why I try to reconnect with this vision for myself is that so I have a guiding light, if you will, to make decisions that ladder up to becoming that version of myself. And like, actualizing that version of myself.
Yes, I completely agree. This is always like a key step in my decision making process. Like when we were talking about buying a house, we wrote everything out together in a journal. And this works especially well like if you're making a decision with other people, where instead of just like talking out loud and just, who knows what's any of it means, if you're actually writing it out, like, okay, what does this all mean? And then you can go back and reference it. And so when we were deciding, like, did we want to buy, what kind of house it should be, how big should it be, all this stuff, we had it all written out. And then the same with the budget, so that, you couldn't be swayed or confused by, things that are happening. Another thing I wanted to bring up is there are a lot of industries that really rely on you feeling like you have to make decisions fast. And so real estate is one of them. So is like the wedding industry. I don't know about like healthcare too, but I feel like that could be a vibe there as well. And so I also wanted to say like this is another important reason to maybe have some of these key decisions and why you decided them written down, so that if you're ever like wavering or doubting or forgetting, like, why am I deciding to do this? You can go back to how things are written down and then just like take it slow. Like, I know that your real estate agent is going to tell you you need to decide this today. You'll be fine. If you don't decide it today, if you lose the house, it's fine. Like, there will be another house that comes along. It's all good. I am very pro on like sleeping on decisions, taking the time to be like, okay, let me rest and then wake up with fresh eyes and see, and just to slow down, give yourself time.
Yeah. I feel like my problem is I always feel like I just need to power through. Like, I just want to come up with an answer, make this decision so I can move on with my life. But I feel like that's when you make impulsive decisions, or potentially, not that there's wrong decisions like we were saying, but like the decision that has more consequences than the other. So I think, taking that time to really slow down is important. Not something I practice often, but I guess for the bigger decisions, I definitely slow down.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, while you were talking, it also made me think the other thing, people are like, Sadie, you don't need to rant about the pros of journaling, but I'm going to just add this one more thing where I also think, as somebody who processes things on my own, this is like a character flaw of mine where if it's a really big life decision, I actually don't want other people's opinions, because I'm like, if they say something where they don't get it, it's just going to piss me off. And then I'm just going to be like mad when I'm already stressed about this decision. Again, big character flaw. I should work on this. Hopefully, I feel like I maybe am working on it. But in any case, so I journal. That's how I process my own emotions, things like that. But I also find journaling really helpful in taking all your thoughts that eat at you, weigh heavy on you, and like giving them physical space. We've said this many times about journaling, but even if you don't come up with a solution through journaling, like right then and there, you have it out on paper and you can let it go from your brain, and then you can hopefully sleep better that night, kind of thing. So just wanted to plug that as well. So many perks to journaling.
Yeah, even just like to get your ideas straight, even if you want to talk to someone else, to be like, I always bring my journal with me to therapy. Then I'm just like, I know like I'll get caught up like talking about one random thing. Like, these are the things I want to talk about, and here's how I want to approach it. Like, even that can help.
I love it. I love that you bring up therapy, because I think that's the next point we wanted to talk about is, talking to people that you trust and people whose opinions matter to you. And why I say that is because no matter what decision you're making, people are going to have opinions, and it's up to you to decide, is their opinion like worth me listening to, caring about, considering, or not, and then doing what you want with all of those opinions. And I feel like, Tag, in your work, was it your work example? Something you said earlier this episode, or maybe it was just when we were chatting, I don't know. But in any case, people will always put themselves first, where, you know, if I were to ask Tegan, should I move to Montreal? She'd probably be like, no, because like, I just bought a house. I'm in Toronto for the next 30 years. You can't leave me. You know what I mean? But it's like, maybe I do want to move to Montreal. Like, I need to put myself first and make a decision for myself. So yeah, all that being said, talk it over with people you trust, but yeah, only people whose opinion matters. And this could also look like parents, mentors, like we talked about, friends. But I also love the idea of talking these things through with your therapist, knowing they're that unbiased third party opinion, that they're not putting themselves first, because they really have no stakes in the matter. They're just trying to coach you through it. I will say on the therapist, like a good therapist should coach you to get to your own decisions, not tell you exactly what to do. My therapist has made that very clear to me many times. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but we can chat it out so you can come to that opinion or conclusion yourself. So something just to keep in mind if you are working with a therapist, but you're like, I don't know, something to be aware of, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I also find like in talking to your therapist about decisions, they like know you so well that they can sometimes be calling you out if you're like not making the decision for you. You know what I mean? Like if you're like, I think I'm going to do this, they'll be like, but why are you actually thinking that? So it's like, and they will tell you the truth from the outside perspective. So definitely something to keep in mind. But I love going to my therapist with like, I can't decide what I should do. Even just like little stuff. Like, I don't know how I should talk to my friend about this or like the big stuff with the house. And, I love it because they have so much context in your life, but they also like have no stake in it. Yeah. Like for you, if you were like, I want to move to Montreal, they wouldn't be like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
They'd be like, okay, let's talk about it. Right. Yeah. So there's definitely that element of it as well. I think if you're still stuck in a decision, another lens to look at it through could be thinking about your personal values and taking a look at the choices and figuring out which choice better aligns with your personal values. And this could mean like anything. It's kind of vague, but I feel like if you are someone who's done a lot of self-reflection and knows your values really well, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is obvious. Like I need to do this because that even like you talking about picking something that makes like is the step towards your ideal life. I feel like it's along the same thought process as that.
Yeah, 100%. I think kind of similar to this is also identifying your table stakes or your non-negotiables. And I actually hear this a lot about apartment hunting or house hunting, but I feel like it applies to any area of your life and no matter what decision you're making. So what this refers to is listing out, again, I love a list, but listing out things that you won't budge on and that they're your non-negotiables, they have to happen or it has to be a certain way, and using that as your guiding light, similar to the values you were just talking about, Tag. So I think a personal example, again, in my career is when I left, so 2 companies ago, I really didn't want to leave, but I got a really great opportunity and I was like, do I do this? Do I not? And I was driving myself crazy about it. However, I had very clear next steps I wanted from my career. I wanted a manager title. I wanted to be managing a team and I wanted to make X amount of dollars. And when the company I was at countered, they couldn't give me a manager title. They couldn't give me a team, but they could match the salary. So ultimately I left because I was like, no, I sobbed leaving.
It's about more than that.
Yeah. And I was like, it's embarrassing to say this, but like when I told my boss I got this offer, I was sobbing. When he gave me my counter offer, I was sobbing. When I was like, okay, I have to like turn down your offer and leave, like I'm quitting, I was sobbing because it was such a hard decision to make, but I had to do that, because my non-negotiables weren't being met. I think same thing when I left my last job. I knew my next job, I had to be back in the office a few days a week for my mental health. And again, I knew I had to make X amount of money because I crunched the numbers of my living expenses, the trips I wanted to go on, and I knew how much I had to be making. And then that's what guided me for, the role I ended up accepting in the summer. I think it can be the same for apartment hunting, house hunting, even relationships, listing out who your ideal partner is. What are the non-negotiables in like their personality and in their values? Could also be in the city that you choose to live in. Like for me, I don't drive, so I need to be able to walk or it needs to have a great transit system. I need to be able to speak the language, which is why I haven't moved to Montreal yet. Like, there's a lot of things that yeah, you just need to figure out what are your table stakes, what are you willing to budge on, and then you can use that to kind of layer into your pro con list.
Yes, definitely. I think next I wanted to talk about personal biases, because this is something I'm super guilty of like falling for when I'm looking at major decisions and mixing up personal biases and thinking that they're my values. So I pulled a couple from Mark Manson's website, actually, which is interesting. But yeah,
his blog has good stuff. I don't judge.
Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
There were some good ones. So, and definitely some that I've seen like come up in my 20s a lot. So that's why I wanted to mention it, because it's so easy to be like, well, I'm just going to stay at my job because of my values. And then it's like, oh, no, that's not what it is. So the first one is confirmation bias. And this is the tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring or downplaying information that contradicts them. For example, yeah, this is so guilty, right?
I love this. Yeah.
So the example he gives is, if you believe all politicians are corrupt, you may only seek out news stories that support that belief while ignoring evidence to the contrary. So this can lead you to make decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information. So it could be like you're stuck at a job that you really don't like. You're like, I think I need to get a new job. But everyone around you is just telling you how terrible the job market is, how if you leave, you'll probably get fired, and you just accept that as fact without knowing what it is. And then every time you hear about a friend who loses their job, you're like, oh my gosh, my aunt who told me that was totally right. That's just confirmation bias. Do we know that that's true? No, we don't. And this is such a big one. If you are leaning one way in a decision and then you're getting information that's confirming that decision, I'm like, yep, I nailed it. I don't need to change jobs. I don't need to move or anything like that. So definitely a big one. I think another one, and this is something I'm very guilty of and didn't actually know about until like midway through my 20s, and it's the sunk cost fallacy, or I've heard it as the sunken cost fallacy, but same thing.
Okay.
And this is the tendency to continue investing time, money, or other resources into something, even if it's not working out, simply because you've already invested so much. For example, if you've spent a lot of money on a car that keeps breaking down, you may keep sinking money into repairs rather than cutting your losses and buying a new car. This can lead to wasted resources and missed opportunities. A much sadder and all too common example of sunk cost fallacy is in relationships. A lot of people stay in bad relationships because they've been in them for so long, and they feel like leaving would mean they've wasted all those years. This was a big one for me in university, especially when I was doing a special program where I like finished by going to a separate college and I wasn't liking it. And my parents were like, you can just stop. And I was like, no, I can't, because I've already spent so much money. And they were like, yeah, but the money's already spent.
Right.
Like, so you're just going to spend more money to do another semester there, which I ended up doing. But
yeah.
So that's the sunken cost fallacy, where it's like, well, I've already spent, a year on my degree and paid $7,000 or however much degrees cost now. So I guess I'll just spend another 3 years and that times 3 doing it. Like, it doesn't really make sense, but it is like, it feels like you're wasting money, even though you're not. I don't know.
Yeah. My head immediately went to university as well, tag, and then also career, I think, is another big one. Like, doing a career change in like your 30s, 40s, even 50s, it's scary. And you're like, oh, but I've like spent my whole life up until this point, like building to this moment, but to make a big career change, like, you can feel like it was all for nothing and all of those years are wasted. The relationship example breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I think it's because I can't relate to it, but I can imagine it, and like, it would be tough, but like I can see it both sides, but that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And above all else, like you're saying, like you're just choosing to continue even though it's not fulfilling, even though, it's not you reaching your greatest potential. Like, all just because that's what you've been investing in for so long. Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe that this comes from like the background of gamblers, where gamblers have the sunken cost fallacy, where they're like, well, I've already spent $1,000, so that means I'm going to win, when that's not how statistics work. Right. And if you're not a gambler, you're like, of course that's not how it works. But when you're in it, and that's how like you're living in it, you're like convincing yourself that this is how it's going to work out. So it's really hard, I find, when you're like in that moment to be able to pull yourself back from it. But something like I tell myself is the money's already spent. And this is something, even with like getting rid of things, where I'm like, well, I spent money on that. I don't want to get rid of it. But it's like, well, you spent, the money's gone. You enjoyed it as long as you could. You don't want it anymore. Like, you just have to leave it at that. But it can be hard.
Totally.
I think there's one more, and this one I do not relate to. I'm actually like the opposite, but I'm going to mention it anyways. And it's the bias of overconfidence. This is the tendency to overestimate our own abilities and underestimate the complexity of a situation. For example, if you're confident that you can fix a leaky pipe in your house, you may not realize that the problem is more complicated than you initially thought. This can lead to mistakes, wasted time and money, and potentially dangerous situations. So I could see this, and actually for a lot of my men in my life, who I, like I said, am the opposite. I'm thinking about like applying to jobs, and all the men in my life are like, oh yeah, I just apply to things. Like sometimes I even lie because we'll figure it out, right? And I'm like, ooh, but if it doesn't work out, that's very bad. Where I'm the opposite, where I'm like, if I don't have every single qualification, I'm not applying, or like talk myself out of it. So this one doesn't really apply to me, but I could see how it does. Or if you're just like, it'll all work out for me. I'll make it work. Put it on the credit card. We'll solve it later. Then it's like, oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I maybe relate to that in some ways, but I can't think of any big life decisions where I relate to that one. I feel like it's a lot of the small stuff. Like the first thing that comes to mind for me is like building IKEA furniture or any type of assembling things. I'm like, I can do this. And then I start and I'm just like, no, I fucking cannot do this. And then I just get frustrated and mad. Then it just sits half assembled until like my parents come to visit and help me. Like, that's the only thing that's like coming to mind for me. But yeah, interesting.
Even just like biting off more than you can chew, I feel like would fall into this. Where it's like, I'll just, say yes and we'll figure it out. And it's like, well, no. Don't do that.
100%. Yeah, I really love these because I feel like these are, you can almost like view these as limiting beliefs or like ways you're holding yourself back without even realizing it. Or maybe if you do realize it, it's very hard to change that like inner narrative and inner dialogue to not be pointing out, the confirmation bias or like not analyzing things through that sunk cost fallacy or however you say that word. Like, so interesting. I feel this just, really gets to the deep, like, level of how you're processing and thinking about things.
Yes, exactly.
Man, is that his name? Yeah, Mark Manson strikes again. It's been a while.
I don't even know who that is.
Oh,
I recognized his name.
Yeah, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay,
okay. And now I think he has like 2 or 3 other books. I think he has a podcast.
Oh, okay.
Like,
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read that one, but I actually have a friend who just recommended it to me because she was like, I hate self-help books. That's the only one I've ever liked. Okay. And so I recognized his name. And then
yeah, I might have it if you want to borrow it.
Ooh, yeah.
I need to check. Definitely. I definitely have read it and I liked it, but I feel like you've read quite a few self-help books, so I don't know if you'll find it. It's one of those, like, it all kind of is the same.
Yeah, it's the same idea.
And I also feel like you won't relate to him because I feel he's like he's very like logical and stuff, but I feel he's just a different personality from you. So it'd be interesting for you to read. Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah, well, even like the fact he's bringing up the bias of overconfidence, I was like, nope, this does not apply to me. But then I was thinking about like the men in my life, and I'm like, oh yeah, they get themselves into situations like that, like exactly
Totally.
with the fixing a leaky pipe. Like so many men who are like, yeah, I could do that. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What made you think that?
That's funny.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we can wrap it up with something we've already mentioned, which is trusting your gut. And I was going to say if all else fails, but honestly, this is the first thing I actually look for is, do I have a feeling literally in my tummy that's saying like yes or no? Or, you know, is my body reacting when I'm doing something? Like your body and mind tell you things in so many different ways, and it's just up for you to interpret it. And I feel, going back to kind of what I was saying about my parents, like I feel extremely fortunate where my parents raised me to follow my gut, and they encouraged me to make decisions based off of that. And I think because that's been how I make decisions my whole life since I was a kid, I now have a very strong sense of intuition, and I feel confident and empowered to make decisions as an adult now. But even if that's not the case for you, I don't know if I've gone on this rant on the podcast before or not, but it's definitely a rant I've gone on many times in my life. And that is the idea that intuition is actually something that can be like practiced. And the more it gets practiced, the stronger your sense of intuition is, and like the better you are with your intuition. And why I say that is because, again, I feel like I have a really strong sense of intuition, but it's because my whole life I've been leaning into it. I've been trying to tune in. What is my gut saying? Following it. And I feel for people who it doesn't feel, or they don't feel their intuition. They don't have any sense of what they should do, what they shouldn't do. They weren't raised, you know, being asked, what does your gut say? They're just like, I'm not intuitive. Like, I don't know. Somebody just needs to tell me. Where it's like, no, you need to start paying attention to how you feel, how your body's reacting, and collecting that information, because over time you can build intuition. And I think something that's mistaken with intuition a lot is making the right decision again, where it's like, if you're intuitive, you always make the right decision. However, I also don't think that's true, where I think even if you make a bad decision or the wrong decision in quotes, you're still collecting information to make a better decision next time. And that's strengthening your intuition to guide you better next time as well. So all this being said, really focus, lean into, you know, your own thoughts, feelings, and try to block everything else out, because at the end of the day, like we said many, many times, your opinion is truly the only one that matters. You're the one that needs to deal with the pros and cons, the benefits and, you know, the cons of the decision that you make, or consequences, I guess, of the decision you make. So yeah, at the end of the day, you're all that really matters.
Yeah, love it. I feel like that's a perfect place to end it. So hopefully if you're listening and you're trying to make a decision, we've given you some tools to sort of like sift through your feelings. I feel like it's always good to maybe start with your gut, run through the list of everything we talked about, and then check in with your gut at the end, see if you're feeling the same, where you landed. And a lot of this, I think, is just related to like self-awareness as well. And that's always hard, but so important. Anyways, I will say that we are on social media. So if you liked what you heard, you can follow us there. We're at Our Golden 20s on almost all the platforms. You can also follow and subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening to us right now. And feel free to give us a rating if you like, because that really, really helps our show. We also have a Patreon page, which is the best way to show your support for the podcast for as little as $2 a month. And all the episodes are released early there, completely ad-free. So that's very cool. I did also want to shout out that we have a YouTube channel, and we're very, very close to 500 subscribers. So if you want to subscribe, go check us out. That would be super nice of you. I think that's everything. So thanks for listening.
See you next Tuesday.
Bye.